It started on a quiet Friday night in downtown Raleigh, North Carolina. The kind of night where people just wanted to forget the week, grab a drink, talk loud, and laugh even louder. But for Naomi and Alicia Turner, it was never about the drinks. They had just wrapped up a 10-hour counterintelligence debrief at Quantico and decided to drive down to Raleigh to celebrate Naomi's birthday. Two sisters, both sworn FBI agents, both exhausted from months of undercover work that not even their closest friends knew about. They wanted normalcy just one night to blend in. Naomi wore a simple navy blazer over jeans, the kind that said off-duty, but still carried authority. Alicia, younger and more expressive, chose a leather jacket and hoop earrings that caught the glow of neon lights outside the bar. The sign above the door flickered. Eddie's Tap Room, a place known for local beers, live blues, and a mostly working-class crowd. Inside, laughter mixed with the sound of pool balls clacking. Country music hummed low in the background. Naomi and Alicia found a table near the back, ordered wings and a ginger ale, and just started to unwind. For a while, it was ordinary, exactly what they'd hoped for. Then, everything changed in a matter of minutes. A group of off-duty local police officers entered three men, loud from the start, one of them clearly already buzzed. Among them was Officer Brian Caldwell, a veteran cop with a reputation for throwing his weight around even when the badge was off. With him was Officer Kevin Langley, a rookie eager to prove he belonged, and Sergeant Mark Holbrook, older, heavier, quieter, but with the same sense of entitlement. They took seats at the bar, ordered a round, and began trading stories about arrests and troublemakers. The tone was casual until their eyes drifted toward Naomi and Alicia's table. "Guess we got outsiders tonight," Caldwell muttered under his breath, eyeing them. Langley chuckled nervously. "Man, leave it alone." But Caldwell was already standing. He swaggered over, leaned one hand on their table, and spoke in that slow, baiting tone that men like him often use when they want to provoke. "Ladies, you two from around here?" Naomi didn't look up right away. She'd dealt with men like him before, loud, overconfident, and used to being obeyed. She simply replied, "Just visiting." Caldwell smirked. "Visiting, huh? You sure you're not casing the place? You've been watching folks pretty close." Alicia frowned. "Excuse me?" "Hey, relax," he said, raising his hands in mock surrender. "Just asking questions. We've had trouble here before, people who didn't belong." Naomi finally looked up, her eyes calm but direct. "We're just having dinner, officer." That word officer hit him like a jab. He wasn't wearing his uniform, but she'd recognized the subtle tan line on his wrist from a watch normally paired with a service-issued strap. "How'd you know I'm a cop?" he asked, grin fading. Naomi gave a small shrug. "Experience." That was all it took. His pride turned to suspicion. The rookie, Langley, walked over to stand behind him. The bar's noise softened as people started to sense something off. Lydia, the bartender, froze mid-pour. Caldwell leaned closer. "Experience in what, sweetheart? You got a badge I should know about?" Naomi stayed silent, and Alicia spoke up, her voice sharp now. "We don't have to show you anything. You're off duty, and you're harassing us." Holbrook, still at the counter, turned his head. "Brian, let it go." But Caldwell ignored him. "Look," he said, tapping the table, "I'm keeping this civil, but if you don't have ID, I'm going to have to ask you to step outside for a talk." Alicia laughed, that short, disbelieving kind of laugh people give when they realize how ridiculous a situation has become. "You're kidding me, right? You don't even have jurisdiction here. You're drunk, off duty, and trying to interrogate two women eating wings." Caldwell's voice dropped lower. "You raising your voice at an officer?" That's when Eddie Morton, the owner, came out from the back. He'd been running this place for decades and didn't like scenes. "Everything all right here?" he asked, trying to defuse it. "Not really," Alicia replied. "Your customer here thinks he can play cop after hours." Caldwell snapped. "Mind your business, sir. You don't know who you're talking to." Naomi could see it spiraling. The rookie looked nervous. Holbrook's jaw tightened, and the rest of the bar, mostly white patrons, stayed quiet, watching but not intervening. Then Caldwell did the one thing that crossed every line. He grabbed Naomi's arm. The reaction was instant. Naomi's hand came up in a controlled, defensive movement. She twisted his wrist just enough to make him release without causing injury. Her motion was textbook defensive training, subtle but effective. Caldwell stumbled back, red with anger. "You just assaulted an officer," he barked. Lydia shouted, "Brian, stop, you're drunk." But he was already pulling his phone out, slurring, "Dispatch, I got a situation, possible assault, 2 females resisting." Naomi exhaled sharply. She'd seen enough. She reached into her purse, pulled out a black leather wallet, and laid it on the table, the gold badge glinting under the bar light. Special Agent Naomi Turner, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Alicia followed suit, flipping open hers. "Special Agent Alicia Turner, FBI, we suggest you hang up that call." The silence that followed was total. Even the jukebox stopped mid-song. Caldwell froze, staring at the badges, his face drained of color, but his ego refused to yield. "Fake," he muttered. "Nice props. You think this is a game?" Holbrook stood now, voice low but urgent. "Brian, stop. Those are real. I've seen the credentials before. Stand down." But Caldwell didn't stop. "I'm not buying it. Nobody flashes federal badges in a bar. Let's see if HQ confirms your little story." Naomi's tone stayed steady. "You're welcome to call it in, officer, but I'd advise you to do it professionally. Every second you prolong this, your department's liability increases." Langley looked uneasy. "Sarge, maybe we should—" "Enough!" Caldwell barked. He reached toward Naomi again, but this time Alicia stood up, her voice cut through the air like glass. "Touch her again, and I'll arrest you myself for assaulting a federal agent." For a few long seconds, nobody moved. Then Holbrook stepped in between them. "Brian, outside, now." The older sergeant led him away toward the parking lot while the rookie lingered, staring at the 2 sisters in stunned silence. Lydia finally exhaled. "I'm so sorry. He's been like this before, but never this bad." Naomi nodded. "You don't need to apologize. Just keep your phone handy. You might get a call from Internal Affairs." As the officers left, Eddie approached the table quietly. "You ladies want me to call someone?" Naomi gave a faint smile. "Don't worry, we'll handle it." They sat back down, their meal now cold, their peace gone, but their composure intact. Alicia glanced toward the door. "He's not done, you know." Naomi replied, "I know, but neither are we." Outside, Caldwell was pacing by his truck, phone pressed to his ear, muttering about imposters and setups. Inside, the Turner sisters were already documenting the entire event, time-stamped and logged the way professionals do when the line between law enforcement and abuse of power blurs. The night had started as a simple birthday celebration. It was now the beginning of a storm that would shake the entire department. And by the next morning, the story of 2 black women threatened in a bar by local police, only to reveal themselves as FBI agents, would be everywhere. But what nobody yet knew was that this wasn't the first time the Turners had faced prejudice under the same flag they served. And it wouldn't be the last. By sunrise, the quiet streets of Raleigh buzzed with a different kind of tension. What happened at Eddie's tap room wasn't supposed to leave those walls. But in the age of smartphones and live streams, silence doesn't stand a chance. Lydia, the bartender, had recorded parts of the encounter not to start trouble, but to protect herself. And within hours, that shaky, dimly lit footage had made its way across social media. The caption was simple but explosive. "Drunk cop harasses 2 women at bar, then learns they're FBI agents." By 10 a.m., the video had over 500,000 views. Hashtags began to trend. "Na Turner Sisters," "Mach Eddie's Bar Incident," "Nach Accountability Now." Inside a glass-walled office on Fayetteville Street, Deputy Chief Thomas Riley stared at the video in disbelief. The public comments were brutal. His phone was lighting up with calls from City Hall, media outlets, and Internal Affairs, and the mayor's office wanted answers before noon. Riley rubbed his temples and sighed. "Caldwell, what the hell did you do?" Meanwhile, across town, Naomi and Alicia sat in their apartment, a small, neatly kept duplex on the outskirts of the city. The night before had drained them, but not surprised them. They'd seen power misused before. They'd seen men like Caldwell walk away unscathed. But this time was different. There was proof. Alicia scrolled through her phone. "We're viral." Naomi didn't even glance up from her laptop. "That was bound to happen. But don't say a word online. We follow protocol." "Protocol?" Alicia repeated, incredulous. "Naomi, he grabbed you. He tried to arrest you. and now half the country's seen it. We can't just hide behind protocol. Naomi finally looked up, steady as ever. We don't hide. We document. That's how we win. Alicia sighed, but didn't argue further. She knew her sister's calm wasn't indifference, it was strategy. Naomi had spent years navigating bureaucracy, learning that sometimes patience was more powerful than rage. Then came the knock on the door. When Naomi opened it, she found Director Ellen Porter, their regional FBI supervisor, standing there, trench coat, sunglasses, and an expression halfway between concern and fury. "Morning, ladies," she said curtly. "Mind if I come in?" They stepped aside. Porter sat down without waiting for an invitation. "I've seen the footage. Headquarters has too. Do you have any idea what this looks like?" Naomi nodded. "Yes, ma'am. It looks like what it is, harassment by local officers." Porter didn't respond right away. She just leaned forward. "You two are federal agents. You represent the Bureau, on duty or off. And now your names are all over social media." Alicia crossed her arms. "We didn't leak it," Porter sighed. "I know, but the video's real, and the narrative is forming without us. Internal Affairs is already calling me for statements." Naomi spoke calmly. "We've already written detailed reports, time-stamped, factual, no emotion. Just the truth." "That's good," Porter replied, "because there's going to be a review both on their end and ours." Alicia frowned. "Wait, we're being reviewed for what?" "For being involved in a public altercation while armed federal agents. Even though you did nothing wrong, optics matter." Naomi nodded slowly. "Understood." Porter stood, adjusting her coat. "I'll handle the Bureau side. You two lay low for now. And Naomi, don't engage the press. They'll come knocking." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "For what it's worth, I'm proud you kept your composure. That's what separates us from them." After she left, Alicia sank onto the couch, frustrated. "Optics," she muttered. "Always optics. We do everything right and still end up under the microscope." Naomi sat beside her. "It's not fair, but fairness doesn't win battles, preparation does." At the same hour, inside the Raleigh Police Department, things were unraveling. Officer Brian Caldwell had been summoned to the conference room. His badge and firearm sat on the table in front of him. Sergeant Holbrook sat beside him, silent. Deputy Chief Riley entered, holding a printed copy of the incident report. He tossed it on the table. "You want to explain this, Brian?" Caldwell, eyes bloodshot, leaned back. "This is being blown out of proportion. They were acting suspicious, I made contact, and then they got physical." "Suspicious?" Riley shot back. "They were eating dinner." "I didn't know who they were," Caldwell insisted. "They flashed fake badges." Holbrook finally spoke, voice weary. "They weren't fake. I saw them. They were real FBI credentials." Caldwell's face hardened. "You're taking their side?" Riley slammed a folder shut. "I don't care whose side anyone's on. The entire department's name is being dragged through the mud because you couldn't control your ego for 5 minutes. Caldwell looked down, jaw tight. "I want your weapon and badge," Riley said. "Effective immediately. You're on administrative leave pending investigation." Caldwell opened his mouth to protest, but Riley cut him off. "And before you say another word, the mayor's office is requesting your resignation. If you want to fight this, get a lawyer." Holbrook looked away as Caldwell muttered something under his breath and shoved his chair back. By noon, local news vans were parked outside the police station. Reporters were shouting questions about the Turner sisters. At the same time, Eddie's taproom had turned into an impromptu landmark. Lydia, the bartender, tried to keep the cameras away, but ended up giving a short, trembling interview. "They were just minding their business," she said. "Those women were calm. The cop, he wasn't." Her statement aired that evening on every local channel. In the FBI field office, Naomi watched quietly as the news replayed Lydia's clip. Alicia, pacing nearby, stopped and said, "You realize we're symbols now, right?" Naomi didn't look away from the screen. "Symbols come and go. I'm more interested in accountability." Alicia nodded. "Then maybe we make sure accountability actually happens this time." Later that night, a new headline hit national networks. Raleigh officers suspended after harassing 2 black FBI agents. The Bureau released a brief statement confirming the sisters' employment, commending their professionalism, and promising cooperation with the investigation. But the police union fired back with its own release, claiming the incident is being exaggerated for social media optics. It only made things worse. On Twitter and YouTube, clips of Caldwell's drunken approach were dissected frame by frame. Activists called for reform, others called for calm, but the energy online was relentless. And through it all, Naomi stayed quiet. Alicia wanted to speak publicly, but respected her sister's restraint. Then came the email. It arrived at 11:43 p.m. from an anonymous address. The subject line read, "He's coming after you." Naomi clicked it open. Inside was a single sentence. Caldwell's brother works internal affairs. They're trying to bury this. She read it twice, her expression unreadable. Alicia leaned over. "Who sent that?" "No clue," Naomi replied. "But if it's true, this isn't just about ego anymore. It's about protection." The sisters looked at each other, silent understanding passing between them. They'd been through field ops, sting operations, and classified missions. But this was personal. Naomi closed the laptop. "Then we do what we do best. We follow the evidence." 2 days later, the city council chamber was packed. Local leaders, activists, and citizens filled every seat for an emergency hearing. Deputy Chief Riley faced the microphones, struggling to balance public outrage with departmental loyalty. "We take this matter seriously," he said. "An internal investigation is underway. The officer has been suspended." From the back of the room, someone shouted, "Suspended? He should be arrested!" The crowd erupted. Cameras flashed. Reporters whispered about the FBI's possible next steps. In the middle of it all, Naomi and Alicia stood quietly near the back, not in uniform, not drawing attention, but observing everything. After the meeting, a reporter spotted them. "Agents Turner, do you plan to press charges?" Naomi kept walking. "We trust the process," she said simply. But as they reached the parking lot, Alicia's phone buzzed an unknown number. She answered cautiously. "Agent Turner," a voice said. "This is Cynthia Harper, Raleigh Tribune. I have something you'll want to see. Meet me tomorrow, noon. Don't tell your supervisors." The call ended. Alicia turned to her sister. "It's starting." Naomi nodded. "Good. Let's finish it the right way." That night, as the city quieted, the sisters reviewed everything. Body cam requests, timestamps, statements. Somewhere in that chaos, there was a pattern, something more than one officer's arrogance. And by the time morning came, they were ready to uncover it. The story had gone from confrontation to exposure to something far bigger. The bar incident was no longer just about one bad night. It was about what happens when truth collides with power and refuses to stay quiet. Morning light spilled through the blinds of Naomi's apartment, casting long shadows across stacks of paperwork and open laptops. The place looked less like a home now, more like a temporary operations center. Naomi stood at the kitchen counter, pouring coffee into 2 mugs, while Alicia typed furiously at the dining table, screens filled with PDFs, department memos, and downloaded clips. "Cynthia Harper, Raleigh Tribune," Naomi said finally, handing over a mug. "You trust her?" Alicia shrugged. "She's been covering police accountability stories for years. She's the one who broke that internal corruption case in Durham last year. If she says she's got something, I'm listening." Naomi sat across from her, thinking quietly. She said, "Don't tell our supervisors." "Yeah, and that's exactly why I want to hear her out," Alicia replied. "Something's being buried, and it's happening fast." Naomi sipped her coffee. "Then let's make sure we're not the ones getting buried with it." At exactly noon, they arrived at the small corner cafe downtown. It was quiet, understated, the kind of place reporters liked for off-the-record talks. Cynthia Harper was already there, mid-40s, sharp eyes, laptop open. She looked up as they entered and gave a cautious smile. "Agents Turner," she greeted. "Thanks for coming." Naomi nodded politely. "You said you had something for us?" Cynthia slid her laptop across the table. On the screen was an internal police report, time-stamped less than 24 hours after the bar incident. "Take a look at this," she said. The report described the altercation, but it didn't match what happened. According to the document, Naomi and Alicia were listed as suspected imposters impersonating federal officers. "They falsified the entire narrative," Alicia muttered, scrolling down. This says we refused to identify ourselves and resisted detention. None of this is true. Cynthia leaned in. That's not the worst part. The file's author? Lieutenant Eric Caldwell, Brian Caldwell's brother. He's the head of internal affairs. Naomi's jaw tightened. So the same family is investigating their own misconduct. Exactly, Cynthia said. And from what I've found, this isn't the first time they've done this. Complaints get rerouted, videos disappear, witnesses get intimidated. I've been following this department for 3 years. They protect their own. Alicia sat back, exhaling. So the email was right. Naomi's voice was low, controlled. How did you get this? Cynthia smiled faintly. Let's just say some people inside the department still believe in the truth. Naomi closed the laptop gently. We appreciate this, but we can't use leaked documents, not yet. It'll jeopardize chain of custody. Cynthia nodded. Understood. But I'm publishing an article tomorrow. The story's coming out with or without official confirmation. Alicia gave a small grin. Then maybe it's time we stop playing defense. That evening, Naomi sat alone at her desk. The room was quiet except for the low hum of her laptop. She opened a secure bureau portal, one reserved for internal misconduct investigations. Every keystroke required clearance. Every document upload was logged. She began compiling the bartender's testimony, timestamps, footage, and the leaked report Cynthia had shown them scrubbed of metadata for now. When she finished, she attached a memo marked for supervisory review priority. But before she could hit send, a thought struck her. She picked up her phone and called someone she hadn't spoken to in months, Agent Colin Reeves, an old friend in the Bureau's Office of Professional Responsibility. Naomi Turner, his voice came through the line. Didn't expect to hear from you. Colin, I need to know something, she said. Is there a federal inquiry into the Raleigh Police Department already open? There was a pause. Why do you ask? Because I think internal affairs is compromised. Colin hesitated. Unofficially? Yes. There's been chatter for a while, mishandled cases, missing reports, but nothing concrete. You got evidence? I might. Send it to my encrypted line. I'll keep it off the record until we know what we're dealing with. Naomi nodded silently. Thank you. After hanging up, she exhaled deeply. The kind of breath that comes when you know the next step won't be safe, but it's necessary. Across town, Officer Brian Caldwell sat in his brother's office, red-faced, angry, and paranoid. They're making me the villain, he growled. You've seen the headlines. They're lying about what happened. Lieutenant Eric Caldwell leaned back in his chair. I told you to keep your mouth shut. You went off duty drunk, picked a fight, and got filmed doing it. There's only so much I can cover. Brian slammed his hand on the desk. You think I'm just going to let them destroy me? Eric's expression darkened. You need to calm down. There's talk about suspension pending termination. If you keep running your mouth, I won't be able to help. Brian glared. You owe me, Eric. I covered for you when that body cam thing happened. Eric froze, his eyes narrowing. You watch what you say. Brian smirked. Yeah, that's what I thought. Maybe I'll remind everyone about that missing footage. The room went silent. Eric leaned forward. You're not going to do anything stupid. Let me handle this. But for God's sake, stay out of sight. Don't contact anyone, especially not those agents. Brian gritted his teeth. They humiliated me. Then let me bury them, Eric replied. The next morning, the Raleigh Tribune published Cynthia Harper's article, Internal Affairs Officer Investigating His Own Brother in FBI Harassment Case. It was explosive. Cable news picked it up within hours. Analysts debated whether the system could investigate itself. Public outrage intensified. Protesters gathered outside the police department holding signs reading, "Justice for the Turners" and "Who Watches the Watchers?" The mayor ordered an emergency review. The Department of Justice called for oversight. Inside the FBI's North Carolina field office, Director Porter summoned Naomi and Alicia again. She didn't look angry this time, just tired. Do you know anything about this article? Porter asked. Naomi shook her head. We didn't leak it. Porter studied them both, then sighed. I believe you, but the fallout's huge. Headquarters has approved a joint task force FBI oversight working with the state. You're being reassigned to it. Alicia blinked. You're putting us on the investigation? Porter nodded. Nobody knows the case better than you two, but this stays by the book, full transparency, every move documented, no vendettas. Naomi smiled faintly. Understood. As they left the office, Alicia whispered, "You realize what this means?" Naomi replied, "We're no longer the story. We're the investigators." That evening, Naomi sat reviewing body cam logs from the night of the incident. Most officers' cameras had been deactivated, standard for off-duty personnel. But one small piece caught her attention. A time-stamped entry from Officer Kevin Langley's device, logged just after midnight. The file had been marked corrupted. Naomi frowned. Corrupted files were rarely accidents. She reached out to the Bureau's digital forensics team. Within hours, they recovered partial footage just 37 seconds long, grainy but clear enough. Caldwell's voice could be heard saying, "They think they're better than us. I'll show them who runs this town." Then static. Alicia leaned over her shoulder, jaw tightening. "That's intent. That's premeditation." Naomi nodded. "And that's our leverage." 2 days later, they were called to a closed-door meeting with city officials, FBI supervisors, and the Raleigh Police Command staff. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Deputy Chief Riley opened with procedural statements, then looked directly at the sisters. "Agents Turner, we appreciate your cooperation. We also expect professionalism during this process." Naomi nodded. "You'll have it. We expect the same." Across the table, Eric Caldwell sat silently, arms folded. Riley continued, "We've reviewed the footage and reports. The department acknowledges discrepancies. However, Officer Caldwell maintains he was provoked." Alicia raised an eyebrow. "Provoked for sitting at a table and eating dinner?" Riley avoided her gaze. "We're not here to debate, we're here to document." That's when Naomi slid a flash drive across the table. "This is Officer Langley's recovered body cam audio. You'll want to hear it." Riley hesitated, then nodded to the tech assistant. Within seconds, Caldwell's slurred voice filled the room. The silence afterward was crushing. Eric's face turned pale. Riley's jaw tightened. One by one, the officials exchanged uneasy glances. Naomi spoke quietly. "That's not just misconduct, that's intent to harass under color of authority," Alicia added. "And falsifying reports after the fact, that's obstruction." Riley exhaled. "This changes everything." Eric Caldwell stood abruptly. "This is out of context!" Naomi didn't blink. Context doesn't change truth. Riley motioned for him to sit down. "Lieutenant, I think you should step out." As Eric stormed from the room, Naomi and Alicia exchanged a look, calm, controlled satisfaction. The system had finally cracked open. That night, back at their apartment, the sisters sat quietly by the window. Outside, sirens echoed faintly in the distance. Alicia looked at her sister. "You think this is over?" Naomi shook her head. "Not even close. He's going to fight back. Men like that always do." "But now," Alicia said softly, "we've got the truth on record." Naomi nodded, and that's how change starts. They sat in silence for a moment, two women who'd spent their careers chasing justice, now forced to fight for their own. Outside, rain began to fall steady, cleansing, inevitable. The story that began in a bar was now unfolding across a city, a department, and a nation watching closely. The truth was out, but justice that was still to come. The morning after the meeting, Raleigh woke up to headlines that shook its foundations. Audio evidence confirms officers' threat in FBI harassment case. Every major network ran it. Commentators debated police accountability versus federal overreach. Protesters filled the courthouse steps with signs reading, "Truth has no badge," and "Protect those who protect us." But while the public was cheering for justice, something darker was already unfolding behind closed doors. Inside the precinct, Lieutenant Eric Caldwell paced the length of his office, every movement sharp, angry, and calculated. He'd been placed on administrative review pending possible suspension. But that wasn't what bothered him most. What kept him pacing was the realization that the Turner sisters now held the power to destroy everything: his brother's career, his own influence, and the unspoken network of favors he'd built for years. His phone buzzed, unknown number. He hesitated before answering. A voice on the other end said, "You've got a leak. Someone inside your department gave the FBI that body cam file. We can help you fix it for a price." Eric froze. "Who is this?" "Doesn't matter. What matters is control. You've lost it, but we can make sure certain evidence disappears. The line went dead. Eric stared at his phone, the words echoing. We can make sure certain evidence disappears. He didn't know it yet, but the game had shifted from damage control to survival. At the FBI field office, Naomi and Alicia were summoned to a briefing. Director Ellen Porter stood at the front of the conference room, surrounded by a handful of senior agents. The energy in the room was tense. Porter began without preamble. We've just been notified that the recovered audio file has gone missing from both the local and federal servers. Alicia frowned. Gone missing? How? Porter looked grim. It was deleted remotely at 3:17 a.m. The log shows a spoofed internal IP traced to a police IT terminal, but whoever did it used bureau credentials to mask their trail. Naomi's expression hardened, meaning someone inside the FBI helped them. Porter nodded. That's one possibility. Another is that our network's been breached. Either way, this isn't local anymore. Alicia clenched her jaw. So they're trying to erase us. Porter met her gaze. Then you make sure they don't succeed. You two are off the official roster now, internal classification for your safety. You'll continue investigating, but from off-site. I'll coordinate through secure channels only. Naomi nodded. Understood. By afternoon, the sisters had relocated to a quiet, borrowed office in a disused warehouse complex on the city's edge. It was cold, quiet, and disconnected from the Bureau's main network, exactly what they needed. They began rebuilding the case from scratch. Backup copies of footage, transcribed statements, timeline reconstructions. They mapped everything on a whiteboard. Bar incident falsified report, internal link data breach. Alicia tapped a marker against the board. Whoever's behind this had access to both systems, local police and Bureau. That's not small time. Naomi replied, no, that's coordinated. Just then, her phone vibrated an encrypted text from an unknown sender. Check your parking brake. Naomi's eyes flicked toward the window. Their unmarked Bureau SUV sat in the lot below. Alicia followed her gaze. What is it? Stay here, Naomi said. She stepped outside cautiously, wind whipping her hair as she approached the car. Her instincts were screaming something felt wrong. She crouched beside the driver's side and looked underneath. There it was, a small black magnetic tracking device attached near the rear axle. She exhaled sharply and snapped a photo. When she came back inside, Alicia's face had gone pale. A tracker? Naomi placed the photo on the desk. Someone's monitoring us. Police? Naomi shook her head. This isn't standard issue law enforcement gear. This is military-grade surveillance, someone higher. Alicia crossed her arms. So what do we do now? Naomi's voice was firm. We find out who's protecting them, and we follow the money. Later that night, Cynthia Harper called from an unlisted number. Agents Turner, you need to hear this, she said, her voice hushed. I got a tip from inside City Hall. The police union's filing a motion to suppress all evidence in your case, claiming national security violations. They're arguing the FBI illegally gathered data. Alicia's eyes widened. They're flipping the narrative. Cynthia sighed. That's not all. They're also leaking your personal records addresses, family info, even bureau assignments. It's intimidation, plain and simple. Naomi's tone turned cold. Then they're desperate. Be careful, Cynthia warned. Someone followed me home last night. I think they know I talked to you. Naomi's voice softened. Cynthia, stay off grid. No interviews, no phone calls. We'll handle this from our end. The next day, Naomi and Alicia met with Deputy Chief Riley at a neutral federal building. Riley looked exhausted. His reputation had been dragged through the mud by Caldwell's actions, and now he was trying to salvage what little integrity his department had left. I know what's happening, he said quietly. There's a faction inside my department protecting Caldwell. They've been doing it for years, fixing reports, burying cases, even deleting footage. But now it's not just them. They've got outside help. Naomi leaned forward. From where? Riley hesitated. Private security contractors, former law enforcement. They do consulting, data handling, network access, that kind of thing. The city hired them last year. Alicia's brow furrowed. Who runs it? Riley handed her a folder. A company called Ironmark Solutions. Headquarters in Charlotte. On paper, they handle police data archiving. In reality, they manage favors. Naomi opened the file invoices, transfer logs, and emails showing payments routed through shell accounts. One stood out, $50,000 wired 3 days after the bar incident from an anonymous city fund to Ironmark. She looked up. That's not coincidence. Riley nodded. No, that's hush money. That night, Naomi made contact with her old friend Colin Reeves again, this time through a secure line. Colin, she said quietly, run Ironmark Solutions through the Bureau's procurement database. I need everything, contracts, affiliations, executives. There was silence on the other end, then a low whistle. Naomi, do you know who owns Ironmark? Tell me. It's a front. The principal shareholder is a retired FBI regional deputy, Frank Dunning. He left the Bureau 5 years ago. He's got ties to state law enforcement contracts across the South. Naomi felt a chill crawl up her spine. You're saying a former Bureau official is backing a company that's protecting corrupt cops? Not just protecting, Colin said, funding. Back in Raleigh, things escalated. Alicia returned to her apartment one evening to find the door slightly ajar. She drew her sidearm instantly, heart pounding, and stepped inside, training kicking in, every movement deliberate. Nothing seemed missing, but her laptop, the one with their duplicate case files, was gone. She called Naomi immediately. They broke in, she said, voice trembling with controlled anger. No signs of forced entry. Someone had a key. Naomi's voice came through steady but tense. Get to the safe house, now. Within an hour, Alicia arrived at Naomi's place. Naomi handed her a burner phone and said, We go dark. No bureau lines, no emails. Alicia nodded, furious but focused. They're not just covering up, Naomi, they're coming for us. Naomi met her gaze. Then we don't hide. We make this public, all of it. The next morning, Cynthia's article dropped online again, this time with an explosive new headline. Private security firm linked to ex-FBI official behind Raleigh evidence tampering. The city went into chaos. The police union issued denials. The FBI opened a formal inquiry. And by afternoon, Ironmark's headquarters in Charlotte was surrounded by federal auditors. But for every door that opened, another seemed to close. Cynthia called again that evening, voice shaken. Naomi, they're raiding my office. Someone got a court order to seize my hard drives. They're saying I violated a secrecy clause under federal statute. I don't even know how they got the warrant. Naomi's eyes darkened. Frank Dunning's pulling strings. What do I do? Leave the office, Naomi said. Now, I'll have someone meet you. Don't trust anyone in uniform. Meanwhile, Eric Caldwell was unraveling. News of Ironmark's involvement had leaked to the press, and suddenly, the protection he'd relied on for years was crumbling. His brother Brian had gone into hiding, refusing to return calls. When Eric showed up at his house, the front door was locked, blinds drawn. He banged on the door. Brian, open up! Nothing. He pounded harder, but still no answer. Then, from behind him, a voice said coldly, He's not home. Eric turned and froze. Naomi and Alicia stood at the edge of the driveway, FBI credentials visible. You've had your chances, Naomi said calmly. Now we have ours. Eric's shoulders tensed. You think you've won? You don't know how deep this goes. Naomi stepped closer. Then enlighten us, Eric sneered. You think Dunning's gonna fall for this? He built half your agency's infrastructure. You go after him, you'll make enemies you can't even name, Alicia replied, voice sharp as steel. Then we'll name them one by one. Before Eric could respond, a black SUV screeched around the corner, unmarked plates. 2 men in suits stepped out, flashing federal credentials. Lieutenant Caldwell, one said, you're coming with us for questioning. Eric's bravado faltered. Under whose authority? The agent's tone was icy. Office of the Inspector General. Naomi and Alicia exchanged a glance. The tide had shifted again, and this time it was in their favor. As Eric was led into the SUV, Alicia murmured, One down. Naomi replied quietly, Not yet. The man pulling the strings still walks free. That night, back in their safe house, Naomi looked at the map of connections they'd pinned to the wall: police, contractors, money trails, and one name circled in red, Frank Dunning. Alicia folded her arms. So how do we take down someone who helped build the system? Naomi replied softly, by using the system he built against him. Outside, thunder rumbled across the North Carolina sky. The cover-up had failed. Now came the reckoning. By the end of that week, the national conversation had shifted. It was no longer just a story about one night in a Raleigh bar. It had become a question about the very heart of justice in America. Every talk show had an opinion. Every network ran split-screen debates. On one side, 2 black women in federal service who exposed corruption. On the other, a system scrambling to protect itself from its own reflection. But inside the Bureau, the story was different. The Turner sisters, once seen as rising stars, were suddenly being treated like liabilities. Emails stopped coming. Their access to case files was temporarily restricted. The agents who used to greet them warmly in the halls now looked away or avoided conversation altogether. Alicia noticed it first. During a morning check-in at headquarters, she went to print updated evidence logs and found her login credentials flagged as suspended pending administrative review. She blinked at the message, confused, then tried again. Same result. When she approached the IT desk, the technician wouldn't meet her eyes. "Sorry, Agent Turner," he muttered. "It came from upstairs. We can't override it." "Upstairs meaning who?" she asked. He hesitated. "Director-level clearance, above the field office." Alicia's voice turned cold. "Above Porter?" He gave a slight nod. "I'm sorry." When she told Naomi later that morning, her sister didn't look surprised, only disappointed. "I expected this," Naomi said, closing her laptop. "When corruption runs deep, the system protects itself first." Alicia frowned. "So what now? We just sit here while they dismantle us?" Naomi leaned back. "No. We build our case outside the system, quietly." "How?" Naomi stood, pulling a small flash drive from her pocket. "We have one thing they don't, truth-backed by evidence. They can erase files, but they can't erase witnesses." She placed the flash drive on the table. "This is a mirror archive, every timestamp, every report, every financial document tied to Ironmark and Caldwell. Encrypted, triple-backed, off-network." Alicia smiled faintly. "So you were expecting this too?" Naomi gave a slight nod. "Always planned for betrayal even from your own agency." Later that afternoon, the sisters were called into Director Porter's office. The air felt heavier than usual. Porter stood by the window, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "Sit down," she said quietly. Naomi and Alicia obeyed. Porter turned. "Headquarters has concerns about the scope of your involvement. They're reassigning oversight of the investigation to D.C. Alicia's voice was sharp. "Meaning we're off the case?" Porter hesitated. "Temporarily, until the review concludes." Naomi's tone stayed calm. "We're being sidelined." Porter sighed, rubbing her temple. "I didn't say that." Alicia stood abruptly. "You didn't have to." Naomi placed a hand on her arm, steadying her. Then she looked at Porter. "Off the record, who ordered this?" Porter hesitated. "The deputy director. And he's close to Dunning." There it was, confirmation of what Naomi had suspected all along. The rot wasn't limited to the local police. It had climbed the ladder all the way into the Bureau's upper echelons. Porter lowered her voice. "Listen to me. I can't protect you if you keep digging. But if you do, document everything. Make them regret underestimating you." Naomi nodded once. "Understood." Alicia stared out the window, jaw tight. "They think they can scare us into silence." Porter looked at her. "Then show them they can't." By that evening, word of their removal from the task force leaked to the media. Headlines read, "Turner sisters removed from FBI investigation amid political pressure." And, "Are the whistleblowers being punished?" Social media exploded again. Public sympathy grew louder. Protesters outside the Bureau's regional office held signs reading, "Hands off the Turners." For the first time in weeks, Naomi and Alicia found themselves not just as investigators, but as symbols. They didn't want fame. They wanted accountability. But in America, sometimes the two couldn't be separated. 3 days later, Naomi received an encrypted email from Colin Reeves. Subject line, "Dunning's Ghost Accounts." She opened it immediately. Inside were dozens of transaction records, offshore accounts tied to dummy corporations under Dunning's name. The money trail connected directly to several state-level police departments, including Raleigh. Attached was a note from Colin. "He's laundering city funds through Ironmark. If this goes public, it'll bring down more than one career. Be careful who you trust." Naomi forwarded it to Alicia with one line. "We have our proof." That same night, Alicia was followed. She'd gone out for groceries near their safe house when she noticed a silver sedan trailing her in the rearview mirror. She turned down 2 side streets, made a loop, it stayed behind. Her pulse quickened. She drove to a nearby parking garage, pulled into an upper level and parked near the exit ramp. Then she waited. The sedan stopped a few spaces back. 2 men in dark clothing stepped out. Alicia gripped the handle of her firearm, stepped out slowly, and shouted, "Federal agent! Hands where I can see them!" The men froze, then turned and bolted. Alicia chased them halfway down the ramp before one of them shouted back, "You should have stayed out of it." They disappeared into the street before she could get close enough to identify them. Shaken, she called Naomi immediately. "They know where we are," she said. Naomi's voice was tense but calm. "Pack everything. We move tonight." Back at the safe house, Naomi packed their files while Alicia wiped their drives. "What if Dunning's not just protecting Caldwell?" Alicia asked. "What if he's protecting something bigger, a network?" Naomi paused, then said quietly, "That's exactly what I think." Alicia looked up. "So how deep do we dig?" Naomi zipped up a bag. "All the way to the roots." The next morning, they met again with Cynthia Harper, this time in a parking lot outside the old State Archives building Neutral Ground. Cynthia handed Naomi a manila envelope. "I found this in the city contracts log. It's a memo between Dunning's firm and a federal liaison. It authorizes Ironmark to handle classified digital storage for multiple agencies." Alicia frowned. "Wait, he's got clearance to handle federal data?" Cynthia nodded. "Yeah, that's why nobody questioned it. He's protected by contracts that even the FBI can't easily audit." Naomi scanned the memo, her expression tightening. "Then this isn't just corruption. It's infrastructure abuse. They've been using secure systems to hide illegal transactions." Cynthia's voice lowered. "You're in dangerous territory now." Naomi looked up. "We've been there since the bar." Back at their new location, an FBI-owned property outside the city, Naomi briefed Director Porter privately. "This is bigger than local misconduct," Naomi said. "We have financial proof tying Dunning's company to federal systems. Someone authorized it from inside headquarters." Porter looked troubled. "You realize what you're suggesting, right? That an ex-deputy director weaponized government infrastructure for personal profit?" Naomi nodded. "And the cover-up extends through multiple agencies. If we expose it, we expose them all." Porter leaned back. "That's career suicide." Naomi replied quietly, "Only if we lose." Meanwhile, Dunning wasn't idle. In Washington, he sat behind a polished mahogany desk, scrolling through encrypted messages from his contacts in Raleigh. The sisters' names kept appearing, every attempt to contain the fallout failing. He picked up the phone. "Eric Caldwell's out. Who's left loyal down there?" he asked. A voice replied, "Couple of captains, maybe a city liaison. Everyone else is scared." "Then make them useful," Dunning said flatly. "I want those women discredited by Monday. Arrest them if you have to." "But on what charge?" "Find one." He hung up. The following morning, Naomi received a formal summons internal review hearing, Bureau Conduct Evaluation. It was an old trick when someone's too effective. You bury them in paperwork and bureaucracy. Alicia read the notice aloud. "They're accusing us of breach of protocol for meeting with the press." Naomi folded the letter neatly. "They're trying to muzzle us. So what do? We show up and we bring the truth with us." The hearing was held in a federal boardroom in D.C. gray walls, no cameras, 3 panelists sitting behind a long table. The sisters sat across from them, calm and composed. The lead investigator cleared his throat. "Agents Turner, the Bureau appreciates your service. However, your conduct has raised concerns regarding unauthorized media contact, data dissemination, and unapproved investigative methods." Naomi replied evenly. "We acted under legal authority to protect evidence compromised by external interference." "Do you have proof of this alleged interference?" Naomi opened her briefcase, slid a single USB across the table. "All time-stamped, all verified." The panelist plugged it in, scanning through the file's financial trails, deleted server logs, signed authorizations under Dunning's name. After several minutes of silence, one of the officials finally said, "Where did you get this?" Naomi met his gaze. From your own archives. The room went still. The investigator leaned back. You understand this implicates multiple senior officials? Naomi nodded. That's why we're here. When the hearing adjourned, the sisters stepped into the corridor, drained but resolute. Alicia exhaled. So what happens now? Naomi looked straight ahead. Now they can't bury it. It's official record. Alicia smiled faintly. You really think that's enough? Naomi's voice softened. No, but it's a start. Later that night, Director Porter called from her office. I don't know what you did in that hearing, she said, but you rattled them. Dunning's been summoned to testify before an oversight committee. The Attorney General's office wants full cooperation. Naomi allowed herself the smallest smile. Then the walls finally cracking. Porter's tone turned grave. Be careful. Men like him don't go quietly. Alicia leaned in toward the phone. Neither do we. That same evening, Dunning received his subpoena. He stared at it for a long time, jaw tight, then whispered to himself, they don't know what they've started. Outside his D.C. townhouse, 2 black SUVs idled quietly, waiting. Inside their cabin, outside Raleigh, Naomi and Alicia sat by the window, the weight of the past weeks heavy, but the fire in their eyes undimmed. We started this fight in a bar, Alicia said, and now it's reached Washington. Naomi nodded slowly. And it's far from over. The wind outside picked up, rustling the trees. The truth was no longer hidden, but exposing it would cost them more than they knew. The summons landed like a thunderclap across Washington. Frank Dunning, former FBI deputy director, ordered to appear before a federal oversight committee. Cable networks looped the news all morning. A polished man in an expensive suit, once hailed as a national security architect, now accused of corruption and obstruction. But inside the bureau, nobody was celebrating, because everyone knew when powerful men start falling, they rarely fall alone. Naomi Turner and Alicia Turner sat in the back of the committee room, anonymous among aides and journalists. Their presence wasn't official. They were observers, per the Bureau's internal memo. Yet everyone knew who they were. Cameras followed when they entered, whisper spreading like electricity. Those are the sisters from Raleigh. At 9 a.m., Dunning took his seat at the witness table. He looked calm, almost bored. The kind of man who had survived too many hearings to be rattled by one more. Senator Adams, chair of the oversight panel, adjusted his glasses. Mr. Dunning, you're accused of using private contractors to interfere with federal investigations and delete evidentiary data. Do you deny it? I categorically deny all wrongdoing, Dunning said smoothly. My company provided technical support under lawful contracts. Any data deletions were internal errors within local agencies, not directives from me. Alicia whispered to her sister, he's rehearsed every line. Naomi nodded. That's fine, we've rehearsed every fact. On cue, the senator turned toward the back. We've received documentation from 2 special agents who conducted the original field investigation, Naomi and Alicia Turner. The room rustled. Naomi stood calm as ever. Senator, the data deletions occurred after we submitted evidence implicating Officer Caldwell and his brother. The deletion originated from servers under Ironmark Solutions, Mr. Dunning's firm. Dunning's jaw tightened. That's speculative. Naomi slid a printed record to the clerk. These are the access logs. His digital signature appears 12 minutes before the purge. For the first time, Dunning's composure cracked. Outside the chamber, reporters swarmed. The Turners pushed through flashing cameras, saying nothing. But behind the spectacle, real decisions were being made. That evening, the Justice Department issued a statement. A joint federal-state task force would investigate Ironmark Solutions and its affiliates for potential obstruction, fraud, and interference with federal operations. It sounded like victory. But Naomi knew better. Dunning's got friends everywhere, she said that night, sitting at the safe house kitchen table. Politicians, retired directors, contractors who owe him favors. He'll stall this out until public attention fades. Alicia poured coffee and replied, then we keep it alive. If the system forgets, the people won't. 2 days later, the pushback began. Anonymous articles appeared online accusing the sisters of political grandstanding. Talk radio hosts mocked them as rogue agents chasing headlines. Naomi ignored it, but Alicia felt the sting. They're rewriting the story again, she said bitterly. First we're victims, now we're villains. Naomi placed a hand on her shoulder. That's how power fights back with noise. Our job is to stay quiet and keep moving. Meanwhile, back in Raleigh, Deputy Chief Riley met privately with a federal liaison. I've turned over every file, he said, but people are scared. 2 officers resigned yesterday without notice. One emptied his locker and disappeared. The liaison frowned. Disappeared? Left town. No forwarding address. He was the one who handled the off-duty rosters the night of the bar incident. The liaison scribbled a note. Find him, fast! Riley nodded grimly. He's not running from us. He's running from them. By midweek, a storm was brewing inside the Bureau itself. Director Porter called Naomi to headquarters. Her face was drawn, her tone measured. I just came from a meeting with D.C. leadership, she said. They're fracturing. Half want a clean house, half want to bury this quietly. You're right, Dunning still has reach. Naomi asked, what about the digital forensics report? Porter hesitated, then slid a file across her desk. Inside were screenshots of the deleted data and something new. A line of code hidden deep inside the system, labeled Access Override, A9 Protocol. Naomi looked up sharply. That's a Bureau override key. Porter nodded. Created years ago for emergency intel retrieval. Only senior executives had access. Dunning was one of them. Alicia leaned forward. So he used the Bureau's own security key to erase evidence. Porter's voice dropped. And if the Oversight Committee confirms that, it's not just corruption, it's espionage under federal law. Naomi closed the folder slowly. Then we're not just in a scandal, we're in history. That night, Alicia couldn't sleep. She stood by the window watching rain streak across the glass. You think this ever ends? She asked quietly. Naomi, sitting on the couch with files spread around her, said, It ends when truth outweighs the fear. Alicia turned. And what if it doesn't? Naomi looked up steady. Then we make it. The next morning, they were back on Capitol Hill for day 2 of Dunning's testimony. He came armed this time, flanked by attorneys and a prepared statement. But the senators had come armed too. Midway through questioning, Senator Adams produced a document marked Classified Declassification Order, Number 97B. This authorization, he said, was signed by you, Mr. Dunning, 3 months after your retirement, granting Ironmark limited access to FBI archives. You were not authorized to sign such an order. How do you explain that? Dunning hesitated. It was an oversight, clerical. Naomi stood from the gallery. That's false. I verified that signature myself during our inquiry. Adams glanced her way. Agent Turner, please approach. Naomi handed him a printed comparison. The signature matches one used on private contracts dated the same week. He copied an old authorization form, redated it, and used it to access restricted servers. The room erupted in murmurs. Cameras flashed. Dunning's attorneys whispered frantically. Adams pounded his gavel. Order! Mr. Dunning, perjury before this committee is a federal offense. You are now under oath to answer truthfully. Dunning's expression hardened. Senator, you're making a mistake. No, Adams replied coldly. You did. That night, the sisters returned to their safe house. Alicia dropped onto the couch, exhausted. We just watched a former deputy director lie to Congress. Naomi poured tea. And now the Bureau has no choice but to act. She was right. Within hours, Dunning's assets were frozen. Ironmark Solutions offices were raided by federal agents. But victories like these were never clean. Because 2 days later, Cynthia Harper vanished. It started with a missed phone call. Then an unanswered text. By evening, her colleagues at the Raleigh Tribune reported her missing. Her car was found in a downtown parking lot, phone left on the seat, engine cold. Alicia felt the bottom drop out of her stomach. They got to her. Naomi's voice was low. Or they're trying to make us think that. The FBI launched a search, but the sisters knew the signs. Whistleblowers vanish when truth gets too close to exposure. Naomi stared at the crime scene photo. She warned us someone followed her. That means she recorded them. Alicia frowned. So where's the recording? Naomi turned toward the wall map. Where she felt safest, Eddie's tap room. The sisters drove through the night, back to the bar where everything began. Eddie met them at the door. Older now, wearier but still loyal. I figured you'd come back, he said quietly. Cynthia dropped something here last week." He reached under the counter and pulled out a small sealed envelope labeled "For Naomi Turner." Inside was a USB drive. Naomi plugged it into her laptop. The screen flickered, then showed footage from a street-side security camera, grainy but clear enough to identify two men dragging Cynthia into a dark van. Alicia's jaw clenched. "They kidnapped her." Naomi zoomed in on the license plate. "Partial match. Government fleet," Eddie whispered. "You think it's local cops?" Naomi shook her head slowly. "No, this is federal." Within 24 hours, the sisters had the data traced. The van was registered to a temporary operations unit based out of a defunct Ironmark warehouse. They contacted Director Porter, who immediately authorized a tactical raid. At dawn, a joint FBI Marshal team stormed the building. Inside, they found stacks of shredded documents, servers still humming, and locked in a small back room, Cynthia Harper, shaken but alive. When Naomi helped her outside, Cynthia gripped her hand. "They said if I talked again, I'd disappear for good." Naomi met her eyes. "You already did the hard part. You told the truth." The raid yielded more than anyone expected. Hard drives, ledgers, secret correspondence between Dunning and several city officials, including payouts to cover misconduct cases nationwide. By nightfall, the Justice Department announced an expansion of the probe to multiple states. The sisters had started a domino effect. But victory carried a price. Naomi and Alicia were ordered to testify once again, this time not as witnesses, but as central figures in exposing a federal corruption network. They agreed without hesitation, because by now they understood something fundamental. When silence becomes system, truth must become weapon. The following morning, as dawn rose over Washington, Naomi stood by the reflecting pool outside the Capitol. Alicia joined her quietly. "Think this ends today?" Alicia asked. Naomi smiled faintly. "No, but today it begins again, this time on our terms." They turned toward the building where the next hearing waited, calm, ready, unshaken. Behind them, the monument reflected across the water like a promise kept. The federal response had begun, and for once it was finally aimed in the right direction. When the story finally broke nationwide, it didn't just make headlines, it shook people. From Los Angeles to Atlanta, from Chicago to Raleigh, crowds filled city streets carrying cardboard signs and smartphones. Their chants echoed off courthouse walls. "Justice for the Turners." Truth has a badge too. "Clean up the bureau." For months, the country had followed every twist from that grainy bar video to the federal hearings. But now, it wasn't just about two sisters. It was about everyone who'd ever been silenced by authority, bullied under power, or dismissed for telling the truth. In Raleigh, Eddie's taproom, once a quiet blue-collar hangout, had become a pilgrimage site. People left flowers, cards, and handwritten notes on the sidewalk outside. One read, "For the night you didn't back down." Lydia, the bartender who recorded the original video, was now a reluctant hero. She told reporters, they didn't fight for fame, they fought for fairness. Naomi and Alicia saw it on the news, but stayed out of sight. Fame wasn't something they ever wanted, and in their world, it came with danger. The FBI had placed them on protective reassignment, meaning they were technically still agents, but barred from active duty. Their days were spent in legal briefings, witness preps, and constant surveillance by Bureau security. To the public, they were symbols. To the Bureau, they were liabilities. Alicia felt the weight of it every day. She'd go running early in the mornings just to clear her head, but even then she could feel eyes on her. One morning, she turned mid-stride and saw an unmarked sedan half a block behind. When she slowed, it slowed. When she stopped, it parked. She called Naomi immediately. "They're still watching," she said. Naomi's voice was calm but clipped. "Then let them. They're afraid of what we still know." Meanwhile, the protests grew. News outlets covered them 24/7. Civil rights groups called the Turner sisters modern-day whistleblowers. Hashtags like "Mine Truth in Uniform" and "Mine Turner Doctrine" trended globally. The White House press secretary fielded questions daily. Does the administration support the Turner investigation? Is the DOJ considering new accountability legislation? The official response was careful. "We believe in due process and transparency." But behind the scenes, politicians were scrambling. The Turner case had ignited something dangerous, a bipartisan demand for reform. Senators who rarely agreed on anything were now co-sponsoring bills to strengthen oversight of law enforcement data systems. And though it sounded noble, Naomi knew it wasn't all about justice. "They're saving face," she told Alicia. "They'll ride this movement as long as it polls well." Alicia laughed bitterly. "So we're not just agents anymore, we're campaign slogans." Back in Raleigh, Deputy Chief Thomas Riley faced his own reckoning. He'd been hailed as a reformer, the man who turned on his own department when corruption was exposed. But it wasn't easy. Half his command staff had resigned. Others were under investigation. He stared out his office window late one night, the city lights glinting off the glass, and whispered to himself, "Maybe this is what it takes." When Naomi called him the next morning, he sounded older, worn, but resolute. "They want to clean house, Naomi," he said. "I'm letting them. We're retraining, rebuilding, and for once I'm not getting calls from City Hall telling me to slow down." Naomi smiled faintly. "That's progress." "Yeah," he said, "but it came at a cost. You two changed everything down here. You should know that." Cynthia Harper, the journalist they'd rescued, returned to her newsroom after weeks of trauma counseling. She was thinner, quieter, but determined. Her first article back was titled, "The Price of Truth: How Two Sisters Forced a Nation to Listen." It wasn't sensational. It was reflective, detailing how silence becomes a habit in systems built on fear. She ended it with one line that went viral overnight. "They didn't break the system. They showed us it was already broken." As public pressure mounted, the Justice Department announced a National Oversight Initiative, a 12-agency coalition to review contractor access to federal data. The Turner's case became the model. Every training program, every press release, every lecture at Quantico suddenly referenced the Turner Protocol guidelines on how agents must handle internal corruption. It was surreal. Naomi watched a training broadcast one afternoon where a young instructor spoke about the courage of two field agents who refused to back down. Alicia watched too, silent for a while, then said, "You ever think we'd be a slide in someone's PowerPoint?" Naomi smiled softly. "If it teaches them what we learned the hard way, I'll take it." But not everyone celebrated them. Within the Bureau, resentment simmered. Some agents felt betrayed that the sisters had gone public and made the agency look weak. Anonymous memos circulated calling them reckless operatives. One morning, Naomi opened her inbox to find a single-line message from an unknown sender. "Heroes fall too." She deleted it but didn't tell Alicia. She knew the intent: intimidation, not warning. That evening, she locked the windows, double-checked the alarms, and told herself for the 100th time that courage didn't always feel brave. Sometimes it just felt lonely. In the community, though, they were anything but alone. Grassroots fundraisers appeared in their name scholarships for black women pursuing law enforcement careers. Colleges invited them to speak, though they politely declined every time. Still, the letters poured in. Children wrote to them, "I want to be an agent like you one day. My mom says you proved people can be brave and kind." Alicia kept them in a box near her bed. "This," she told Naomi one night, "is what makes it worth it." Naomi smiled. It always was. Months passed. The hearings continued. Frank Dunning, now formally charged with conspiracy and obstruction, was under house arrest awaiting trial. His empire had crumbled. Ironmark Solutions was dissolved. But justice moved slowly, too slowly for some. In Raleigh, a small protest turned violent when counter-demonstrators arrived. Police were called. Tear gas was fired. Alicia saw the footage that night, young protesters holding her photo, coughing as they ran from smoke. She shut the TV off. "I didn't want this." Naomi's voice was calm. "You didn't cause it. You revealed it. But they're fighting because of us." "No," Naomi said gently. "They're fighting because of what's been happening for years. We just pulled the curtain." Alicia looked at her sister, the same calm presence who'd stared down an armed officer in a bar and never blinked. "How do you always stay steady?" Naomi smiled faintly. "Training." Then, after a pause, "And faith." One morning, they received an unexpected visitor, Director Porter herself. She arrived unannounced. No security detail, just her and a folder. "I thought you'd want to see this," she said, laying it on the table. Inside was a formal commendation letter signed by the Bureau's acting director and the Attorney General. It read, "For exceptional integrity, resilience, and commitment to justice in the face of institutional adversity." Alicia blinked. "They're honoring us?" Porter nodded. "Officially, quietly. You'll never see a press release about it, but it's on record. You'll be reinstated as full agents after the trial." Naomi smiled slightly. "We didn't do it for recognition." "I know," Porter said softly. "That's why you deserve it." As months turned into a year, the ripple effects deepened. Raleigh's police department became a national case study in reform. Federal contracting protocols were rewritten. The FBI launched an internal ethics training program named the Turner Initiative. Yet despite the progress, Naomi and Alicia stayed grounded. They still lived modestly, still worked quietly, still avoided interviews. Because for them, the fight was never about headlines, it was about dignity, theirs and everyone's. One autumn afternoon, they returned to Eddie's tap room for the first time since that night. Eddie greeted them with open arms. "You know, people still ask about you every day," he said, smiling. "Never thought my little bar would end up in history books." Naomi chuckled. Neither did we. They sat in the same corner booth, the one where everything had begun. The place looked different now. New paint, brighter lights, a small plaque on the wall reading, "Where Courage Sat." Alicia stared at it quietly. "You ever think about that night?" Naomi nodded. "Every time I walk into a room where someone tries to test my worth." Eddie raised a glass. "To the Turner sisters, may nobody ever forget." Naomi smiled. "We'll drink to that." Later, walking back to their car, Alicia looked up at the evening sky, pink and gold against the city skyline. "We started with fear," she said softly. "Now it feels like peace." Naomi nodded. "That's the thing about truth. It hurts first, then it heals." Alicia smiled. "You always did like the last word." Naomi laughed quietly. "Not this time." They walked on in silence, sisters, agents, survivors, knowing the world had changed because they refused to look away. Winter in Washington carries a kind of silence that feels deliberate, as if the city itself is holding its breath. And on that gray February morning, all of D.C. seemed to pause as the doors of the federal district court opened. Frank Dunning stepped out of a black SUV in handcuffs, flanked by U.S. Marshals. The once revered deputy director of the FBI, the man who had commanded entire intelligence divisions, now walked through a crowd that chanted his name, not in honor, but in outrage. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Journalists filled the gallery, reporters whispered into microphones. Outside, protesters held signs with a familiar phrase, "Truth has a badge too." And in the back row sat Naomi and Alicia Turner, quiet, watchful, unflinching. They weren't required to attend, but they'd come anyway. Because this wasn't just about the law, it was about closure. The prosecutor's opening statement was short, sharp, surgical. Frank Dunning used his former position and connections to obstruct active federal investigations. He paid local officials to falsify records. He ordered evidence destroyed, and he did so to protect himself and others under investigation. The proof is overwhelming. When the prosecutor gestured toward the Turner sisters, the entire room turned to look at them. "These agents didn't seek fame or power," he said. "They sought truth, and for that, they were targeted by the very system they served." Dunning's defense attorney rose smoothly. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case isn't about corruption. It's about politics. My client is being scapegoated for bureaucratic chaos he didn't cause." Naomi leaned toward Alicia and murmured, "He's going to blame the system he built." Alicia smirked. Fitting. As the trial unfolded, it became clear that Dunning's web reached further than anyone had imagined. Emails, contracts, and coded transfers revealed a decade of quiet manipulation funds siphoned from city budgets, data erased from federal archives, whistleblowers silenced with threats or payouts. Each revelation hit the courtroom like a thunderclap, but none struck harder than the moment Naomi took the stand. She swore in, her tone measured, her words deliberate. "On the night of the incident, we were not acting as agents. We were citizens targeted without cause. But what followed exposed something bigger, a system where accountability stopped at the point where power began." The courtroom hung on every word. Alicia watched from the gallery. pride and sorrow blending behind her eyes. She knew what it took for her sister to stay composed, the pressure, the stares, the weight of every hidden threat. Then came the defense's cross-examination. Dunning's lawyer stood, pacing deliberately. "Agent Turner, isn't it true that you broke Bureau protocol by conducting an independent investigation without authorization?" Naomi met his gaze calmly. "I acted to preserve evidence that was being destroyed." "So you admit to violating internal procedure?" "I admit to protecting the truth when the procedure failed to do so." The lawyer smirked. "Perhaps the Bureau disagrees." Naomi didn't blink. "Then the Bureau should look in the mirror." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Even the judge had to tap his gavel to restore order. When Alicia took the stand, she was more fire than frost. The defense tried to paint her as impulsive, emotional, reckless. "Agent Turner," the attorney pressed, "would you say your actions were driven by personal anger toward the Raleigh Police Department?" Alicia's eyes narrowed. "I was angry at corruption. That's not personal, that's patriotic." The room erupted again. Dunning glared at her from the defense table, jaw tight. For the first time, the mask slipped, revealing something darker, colder. Outside the courthouse, the nation divided. Commentators called it the accountability trial of the century. Supporters of the Turners marched outside the courthouse daily, waving flags and singing hymns. But there were others, critics, who claimed the sisters had embarrassed the Bureau, that they'd made law enforcement look weak. It was the same narrative Naomi had warned about, power defending itself under the guise of patriotism. One night, Alicia scrolled through social media and found a video clip of an anonymous agent saying, "If you question your own agency publicly, you don't deserve the badge." She shut the laptop hard. They still don't get it. Naomi looked up from her files. "Some people never will. That's why we keep showing them." As the trial entered its third week, Dunning's legal team tried one last desperate move, blaming the deceased. They claimed Officer Brian Caldwell, who had died in a car crash shortly after his brother's arrest, had been the real orchestrator behind the falsifications, and that Dunning had been duped. The gallery gasped. Alicia whispered, "He's throwing a dead man under the bus." Naomi shook her head. Classic deflection. But the prosecution was ready. They presented an internal memo written by Dunning months before Caldwell's involvement, proving he had approved payments to Ironmark long before the Raleigh scandal. It was the breaking point. The defense rested the next day, visibly defeated. When closing arguments began, the prosecutor faced the jury. "This case isn't about politics or bureaucracy. It's about accountability, about whether we still believe that power comes with responsibility or just privilege." He paused, then looked toward Naomi and Alicia. "These women didn't expose a scandal. They exposed a choice between silence and integrity. And today, that choice is yours." The jury deliberated for 2 days. Those 48 hours felt like 48 years. Naomi spent the first night pacing the small apartment the Bureau had provided for protection. Alicia spent hers writing a habit she'd picked up during their suspension. When the call finally came, it was brief. "Verdict's in. Get here within the hour." They arrived to a packed courtroom. The air felt electric. The clerk stood and read the decision. "On the charge of obstruction of justice, guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to falsify federal records, guilty. On the charge of misuse of government access credentials, guilty." 3 words echoed through the chamber like bells. Guilty on all counts. Reporters erupted, cameras flashed, but Naomi didn't smile. She just closed her eyes for a moment, whispering a quiet prayer of relief. Alicia exhaled shakily. "We did it." Naomi nodded. "No, they did it. The truth did." Outside, the city roared. Crowds chanted their names again, but this time there was something deeper, not anger, but gratitude. Cynthia Harper stood beside them on the courthouse steps, her notebook in hand. "You know what this means, right?" she said, smiling. "You just made history." Alicia laughed softly. "We didn't make history, we just made it honest." Weeks later, the ripple effects began. Congress passed the Federal Integrity and Oversight Act, mandating independent monitoring of data handling contracts across all law enforcement agencies. The act became informally known as Turner's Law. In Raleigh, a new generation of police recruits took oaths under a mural painted on the side of the Academy building, 2 sisters standing tall beneath the words, Truth needs no permission. Lydia and Eddie attended the unveiling. Lydia cried quietly, clutching a photo from the night everything began. For Naomi and Alicia, life began to return to something resembling normal. They were reinstated as full agents, this time in Washington, working under Director Porter on internal reform initiatives. Their office was small, but their reach was vast. They trained new agents, reviewed misconduct cases, and advised on policy. One afternoon, a young recruit approached them nervously. "Agents Turner," he said, "I just wanted to say, you're the reason I joined. I figured if the Bureau has people like you, maybe it's worth it." Alicia smiled. "Then make it worth it every day," Naomi added softly. "And remember, integrity isn't loud, it's consistent." But even in victory, there were scars. They still received threats, still checked their mirrors, still lived with the memory of the night that changed everything. Sometimes, when the world quieted, Naomi replayed it all in her head: the bar, the confrontation, the sound of her badge hitting the table. Each time she reminded herself why they hadn't walked away. Because justice isn't a job, it's a calling. Months later, they visited Cynthia's newsroom for an interview, her first since the trial ended. When she asked what they'd learned through it all, Naomi answered that the system bends more than it breaks, but it only bends back if people push hard enough. Alicia added, "And sometimes the loudest truth comes from the quietest people." As they left, a young girl outside the building recognized them and ran over. "Are you the Turner sisters?" she asked shyly. Alicia smiled. "We are." The girl held up a toy badge. "I want to be like you." Naomi crouched down, her eyes soft. "Then promise me something." "What?" "Don't just wear the badge, deserve it." The girl nodded solemnly. "I will." That night back home, the sisters sat on the porch in silence. The air was cool, the stars faint above the city lights. Alicia turned to her sister. "You think Mom would have been proud?" Naomi looked up at the sky. She already was. They sat there for a long time, no words left to say, because sometimes victory doesn't sound like applause, it sounds like peace. And for the first time in a long time, peace finally felt real. Spring came slow that year, as if even the seasons needed time to recover. The air in Washington felt lighter, the headlines quieter. For once, the world seemed to have exhaled. The storm was over, or at least it looked that way from the outside. For Naomi and Alicia Turner, the fight that began in a dimly lit bar had ended in a federal courtroom. The corrupt were exposed, the guilty convicted, and the country had finally started asking better questions about power and accountability. But when the dust settled, silence carried its own weight. The sisters returned to work at the Bureau's Washington field office under Director Ellen Porter's supervision. Their roles had changed. They weren't field operatives anymore, they were advisors in the Bureau's new Integrity and Oversight Division, a unit built from the ashes of their case. Every morning they'd walk through the same glass doors, passing recruits who looked at them with quiet respect. Some saluted, some just nodded. All of them knew what the Turner sisters had done. But Naomi never let it show. She'd nod politely, log in at her desk, and bury herself in case reviews. She wasn't interested in fame, she was interested in fixing what was broken. Alicia, on the other hand, found it harder to move on. She'd always been fire-sharp, emotional, unwilling to let things go. And though she'd survived the chaos, something inside her stayed restless. "You ever feel like we're just waiting?" she asked one morning, sipping coffee as the city buzzed outside their office window. Naomi looked up from her screen. "Waiting for what?" "For the next fight." Naomi smiled faintly. "There's always a next fight. That's why we stay ready." Alicia sighed. "You always make it sound easy." "It's not easy," Naomi replied. "It's just necessary." By summer, life had found a fragile rhythm again. Cynthia Harper's book, Truth Has a Badge, The Turner Case and the Fight for Accountability, had become a national bestseller. Talk shows invited her on nightly. She spoke about integrity, resilience, and the cost of doing what's right. But she never glamorized the sisters. She told their story with precision, human, flawed, real. "They didn't try to be heroes," she said on air. "They just refused to be victims." In Raleigh, the police department continued its overhaul. New leadership, revised training, mandatory body cams. Deputy Chief Thomas Riley became Chief Riley, the first to implement a public oversight board that met every month. He sent Naomi a short message one evening. "We're not perfect, but we're better. And that's because you didn't let us hide." Naomi texted back, "That's all we ever wanted." But even as institutions changed, the personal toll lingered. Alicia still woke some nights with the memory of that bar, the grab on Naomi's arm, the cold fury in her chest, the disbelief that it had escalated that far. Naomi still avoided loud crowds. Too many memories of flashing lights and raised voices. They'd been trained for danger, but not for betrayal. And healing from betrayal takes longer than justice ever does. One weekend, the sisters finally took a break. They drove south to the Blue Ridge Mountains. No phones, no schedules, no noise, just open air and time. For the first time in months, Naomi laughed freely. They hiked, cooked over a campfire, and talked about things that had nothing to do with work, childhood, music, what-ifs. At one point, sitting under a blanket of stars, Alicia asked softly, "Do you ever wish it hadn't happened?" Naomi stared into the fire for a long time before answering. "No, I wish it hadn't been necessary, but it showed us who we are." Alicia nodded slowly. "Yeah, and who they were." Naomi smiled faintly. "Both matter." When they returned to D.C., they found an invitation waiting on Naomi's desk. The FBI annual commendation ceremony invitation only. They hadn't planned to attend. But Director Porter called personally. "You should be there," she said. "Not for the award, for what it means." Naomi hesitated. "We didn't do this for recognition." Porter smiled. "That's exactly why you deserve it." The ceremony was held at the Bureau's Hoover Building auditorium, polished floors, crisp uniforms, and that familiar sense of formality that only federal events have. When their names were called, the applause was immediate and heartfelt. Even those who once doubted them now stood in respect. Naomi accepted the plaque engraved with the words, "For unwavering integrity and exceptional service in the pursuit of justice." She turned briefly toward the audience and said quietly, "We serve the law, but the law only serves justice when people do." No speech, no theatrics, just truth. The crowd rose to its feet. Alicia looked over, pride softening her features. For all the chaos, for all the scars, her sister still stood like an anchor, unshaken. That night, after the ceremony, they walked through the quiet D.C. streets. The Capitol dome glowed faintly in the distance. The air smelled like rain and cherry blossoms. Alicia broke the silence. "You think it's over?" Naomi glanced at her. "Stories like ours don't end. They just stop making the news." Alicia smiled sadly. "I'll take that." Naomi nodded. Peace doesn't always need an audience. In the months that followed, their work in the Oversight Division began to ripple outward. Reports from other field offices started surfacing, agents inspired by the Turner's example speaking up against misconduct, exposing cover-ups before they spread. The culture was changing, slowly, unevenly, but undeniably. And every time a new report crossed Naomi's desk, she'd think, this is how legacy begins, not in one explosion, but in echoes. Cynthia visited them again one afternoon, her recorder off this time. "No interviews today," she said, "just wanted to check in." They talked about life, family, and the strange quiet after chaos. Before leaving, she said, "You know, people will tell this story for decades." Naomi smiled. "Good. Maybe they'll learn something from it." Cynthia paused. "You ever think about what would have happened if that night had gone differently?" Alicia answered before Naomi could. "We'd still be agents, but the world would be worse." Later that evening, the sisters walked through the National Mall. Tourists snapped photos. Joggers passed by. A street musician played softly near the reflecting pool. They stopped near the water. The monument mirrored perfectly on its surface. Naomi stared at the reflection and said, "When it started, I thought it was about survival, but it was about purpose." Alicia looked at her. "And what's the difference?" Naomi smiled. "Survival keeps you alive. Purpose keeps you human." They stood there quietly, the sound of the city fading into the distance. Weeks later, another envelope arrived. This one wasn't from the Bureau or the government. It was handwritten, addressed simply to the Turner sisters. Inside was a photo of a young woman in an FBI Academy uniform with a note. "I graduated today because of you." Alicia held it for a long time, tears glinting in her eyes. Naomi placed a hand on her shoulder. "That's what justice looks like." As summer turned to fall, their lives settled into something close to normal. Naomi began teaching part-time at Quantico, mentoring recruits on ethics and accountability. Alicia transferred to the Community Outreach Program, helping bridge trust between local police and civilians. Different paths, same mission. Sometimes they'd meet for lunch in the city, laughing over memories that once terrified them. Other times, they'd fall silent, two women who had seen too much but refused to let it break them. One evening, Naomi found Alicia sitting on their apartment balcony watching the sunset. "You okay?" Naomi asked. Alicia nodded. "Yeah, just thinking." "About what?" Alicia smiled softly. "About how it all started with one night at a bar and ended with a country paying attention." Naomi chuckled. "It didn't end. It just began the right way." Alicia leaned back. "So what do we do now?" Naomi looked out at the horizon. "We live, that's enough." They sat together in comfortable silence, the golden light fading over the skyline. For once, no sirens, no cameras, no threats. Just peace hard-earned, honest, deserved. The sisters didn't see themselves as heroes. They were simply two women who believed that courage wasn't about fighting back, it was about standing still when the world told you to sit down. And for that, history would remember them not as victims, not even as agents, but as proof that truth, once spoken, never truly dies. 10 years later, the story of Naomi and Alicia Turner had become more than an investigation, it had become a chapter in American law enforcement history. The night at Eddie's Taproom was now taught in classrooms, discussed in leadership seminars, even dramatized in documentaries. But to the sisters, it was still personal, a reminder of how fragile integrity can be and how powerful it becomes when defended. Naomi Turner, now in her 40s, walked the marble halls of Quantico's training academy, her pace steady and deliberate. She wasn't a field agent anymore. She was Professor Turner, teaching ethics and crisis response in federal law enforcement. Her students, a new generation of recruits, hung on her every word. "When power goes unchecked," she told them, "it doesn't just fail the people outside the system, it fails the people inside it too. You will be tested in silence, not in spectacle. That's when your integrity matters most." At the back of the classroom, a hand rose timidly. "Ma'am, do you ever regret it, exposing the Bureau like that?" Naomi smiled softly. "I didn't expose the Bureau. I reminded it who it's supposed to be." The class fell silent. The weight of that truth lingered long after the bell rang. Across the city, Alicia Turner was running a community policing initiative under the Department of Justice. Her office was cluttered maps, reports, coffee cups, and letters from citizens who'd written her over the years. She preferred being out in the field talking to local officers, visiting neighborhoods, rebuilding bridges that bureaucracy had burned. That morning, she was at a police academy graduation in Raleigh. The air was warm, the crowd proud, the future uncertain, but hopeful. When she was introduced, the applause was deafening. She took the microphone and said, "10 years ago, I stopped believing the system could fix itself, but people can. Every honest cop, every brave citizen, every voice that refuses to stay quiet, that's what makes change real. Never forget who you serve, and never forget why." In the front row, a young recruit wiped her eyes. On her uniform sleeve was a patch that didn't exist a decade earlier, a silver badge overlaid with the initials TIO, the Turner Integrity Office. Back in Washington, the FBI's Hoover building had changed too. A plaque stood in the main atrium, right beneath the seal. To Agents Naomi and Alicia Turner, whose courage reminded this institution that truth is the highest form of service. Visitors stopped to read it every day. Some took photos, others just nodded quietly. Naomi had seen it once, years ago, during its dedication. She hadn't gone back since. To her, the plaque wasn't the legacy. The people living by its lesson were. Cynthia Harper, now an editor at a major national newspaper, wrote a 10th anniversary retrospective titled "The Night the Truth Wore Badges." In it, she reflected, they didn't overthrow a system, they rewired it. They showed that reform doesn't come from anger alone, but from conviction. And conviction, when consistent, changes everything. The article went viral again, just like her first story had a decade earlier. And somewhere in a small bar in Raleigh, Eddie and Lydia watched the piece on TV, smiling through tears. Eddie raised a glass toward the plaque on his wall, the same one that still read, "Where Courage Sat." "To the Turners," he said softly, "still serving even from miles away." Naomi's life had found a rhythm quiet but purposeful. Each morning she'd take the train to Quantico, lecture on ethics, then stay late grading reports. She'd see names she didn't know, young men and women eager to wear a badge, unaware that the course they were taking had been written in her handwriting. One evening, as she was packing up, a cadet knocked on her door. "Agent Turner?" the young woman asked shyly. "I mean, Professor Turner?" Naomi smiled. "Both work." The cadet hesitated. "I just wanted to say thank you. My mom told me about you and your sister when I was a kid. She said you proved that bravery doesn't need permission." Naomi's expression softened. "Your mom sounds wise. She's a detective now. She said she joined because of you." Naomi paused, her throat tight. "Tell her I said she chose well." Meanwhile, Alicia was facing her own crossroads. A new administration had offered her a senior post, deputy director for community relations at the DOJ. It was an honor, but also a burden. More politics, more oversight, less freedom. That evening, she called Naomi. "They want me in D.C. full-time," she said. "Big office, staff, press briefings, all that." Naomi chuckled softly. "Sounds like a headache." "I know," Alicia laughed. "Part of me wants to say no. I like being with people, not behind a podium." Naomi's voice turned gentle. "Then ask yourself this: where do you make the biggest difference? In one city or in all of them?" Alicia was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled. "You always did know how to make things complicated," Naomi replied. "That's my job. Yours is to decide." The next day, Alicia accepted the position. Her first act as deputy director was to launch the Community Integrity Initiative, a national outreach program designed to train local law enforcement officers in ethical decision-making and cultural accountability. She called it the Turner Method. A few months later, Naomi flew to Raleigh to speak at a memorial event for fallen officers, a ceremony that had invited her every year since the trial, though she'd always declined. This time she said yes. Standing at the podium, she looked out at a crowd of families, officers, and students. "I stand here not as an agent," she began, "but as a witness to what courage can do when fear tries to win. We all carry badges, some metal, some invisible. What matters is whether we carry them with honor." The crowd was silent, reflective. Somewhere in the back, Eddie raised his hand in a small salute. Naomi smiled faintly and continued, "Justice isn't a moment, it's a motion. You either move with it or you stand in its way." Applause followed, not thunderous, but genuine. The kind that comes from people who finally understand. That night, Naomi stayed behind after the ceremony. The bar was quiet, the streets calm. She walked down the same alley she and Alicia had once hurried through that night a decade ago. The air still smelled faintly of oak and rain. She stopped outside Eddie's tap room, the neon sign now steady and bright. Through the window, she saw people laughing, strangers who didn't know their table had once been ground zero for history. Naomi smiled. That was how it should be. She placed a hand on the glass door and whispered, "We did it." A few weeks later, Alicia joined her in Washington for a televised panel on ethics in law enforcement. They'd done hundreds of interviews before, but this one felt different, calmer, more reflective. When the host asked, "If you could go back to that night in Raleigh, would you change anything?" Naomi paused. "No," she said quietly, "because every injustice exposed brings us one step closer to what's right." Alicia added, "And sometimes the only way to remind a system of its purpose is to make it uncomfortable." The audience applauded softly, not the applause of spectacle, but of understanding. After the broadcast, the sisters went for a walk by the Potomac. The city lights shimmered on the water like tiny fires, Alicia said. "You realize we've spent 10 years cleaning up one night?" Naomi smiled. "And we'd do it again tomorrow." They stopped near the edge of the river. A breeze swept past, gentle and cool. Naomi looked at her sister. "You ever think about retirement?" Alicia laughed. "Not a chance. The world still needs us." Naomi nodded. "Then we keep going." They stood there in the quiet, two silhouettes against the glow of the city they'd changed forever. Months later, a small museum in Washington unveiled a new exhibit titled Voices of Integrity, Modern Heroes of American Justice. Among the display's case files, press clippings, recordings stood a single glass case. Inside it was a pair of worn leather FBI badge wallets side by side. A small placard read, "Donated by Agents Naomi and Alicia Turner, evidence that truth is its own reward." Visitors stopped, read, and often lingered, some leaving notes that simply said, "Thank you." In the years that followed, the sisters remained close, their bond unbreakable. They didn't chase recognition, they chased meaning. And in that pursuit, they became something larger than any title, larger than any agency. They became a reminder that integrity, once awakened, does not sleep again. One evening, long after everyone else had gone home, Naomi stood alone in her classroom at Quantico. The last light of sunset filtered through the windows. She looked at the empty chairs and thought of all the people who would sit there, the future agents, the future decisions, the future tests of conscience. She smiled to herself and whispered, "Don't forget what the badge is for." Then she turned off the lights and walked out. Alicia, meanwhile, was across town, closing her own office for the night. On her desk sat a framed photo, the two of them outside the courthouse, wind in their hair, eyes clear, the caption beneath it reading, "The day truth won." She looked at it for a long time, then reached over and flicked off the lamp. Outside, the city hummed quietly, untroubled, alive. For 10 years, their story had been told and retold. But to them, it was never about fame, politics, or power. It was about a single belief that started it all. That no badge, no title, and no uniform ever outranks the truth. And that belief, stronger than fear, louder than silence, would outlive them both.